Hello everyone, this is part 16 of What If Naruto Was a Prodigy and in the Anbu, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Before Naruto went to sleep that night, he made a quick call into the mission assignments desk and met up with one of the clerks taking night duty. She was somebody that Naruto had met before, and had only been too happy to add a pile of small envelopes to the mailroom letters that would be distributed throughout that night. As a hidden village, Konoha never slept, and there were always stores and shops open and services provided throughout the night. Then, after that, Naruto went back to the Hokage's residence for some rest. Naruto woke up at 6 the very next morning, and after attending to his normal duties, he put in his Jonin vest and strapped on his weapons and tools and left. Sometime during the night, some mail had arrived for him, and Naruto had been able to look at his schedule. For the past month, he had been on leave. Each shinobi was allocated a certain amount of days a year to keep up with their physical and chakra-based training. This training was mandatory, and depending on the shinobi, the number of days varied. An administrative clerk would be allocated far less days than an Anbu operative, for example. Despite the fact that Naruto had just spent a month in training, he still had weeks of leave left, so he had arranged for the next week off for both him and the rest of Sigma Squad. They would need some time to catch up and readjust their techniques and training with each other. That had been one of the letters. The others had been addressed to the former members of Sigma Squad. Naruto traveled through the streets of Konoha, moving from Sector 1 to Sector 11. The sun had barely begun to rise over the horizon, and the stars and moon continued to twinkle in the darkened sky. Nonetheless, there was still a significant shinobi presence throughout the village. The Kage and the feudal lords had left Konoha yesterday, but there was still a significant number of tourists and dignitaries, many who had bought their own guards, or who required some discreet surveillance to make sure that they didn't get up to anything. As the civilian population of the village began to stir, Naruto had passed two Anbu recon squads and a strong contingent of Chunin military police. The smell of baking bread began to fill the air and workers had begun to set out the market stalls on the streets. Naruto walked past them all, smiling politely at the few who greeted him, and continued on. He could have easily sped through the streets, or used the designated rooftop passages as a shinobi with Anbu clearance. He had access to the best ones, after all, but there was something about walking through the village at dawn that he liked. He arrived in Sector 11 some time later. It was a huge, sprawling sector, filled with restaurants, food stalls, museums, galleries and other areas of interest. Sector 11 was where people went out for the night. Naruto had made a booking at one of the local restaurants, a little corner shop that served to both shinobi and civilian customers. It was a small shop, filled with booths and round tables. Behind the counter by the door, the kitchen was visible and the sound of sizzling food could be heard. The server at the counter blinked owlishly at him, as if he was trying to remember where he had seen Naruto's face before, but luckily he didn't remember and he gestured at the booth that Naruto had booked. Naruto walked over, striding past a bickering couple who spoke to each other in hushed tones, and eyed the booth. He hadn't been the first to arrive. Kage sat there, reading a newspaper with a pen in hand. The older Anbu agent was in his early to mid-20s, with dark hair, dark eyes and a very ordinary face. There was nothing remarkable about him, either in features of personality, but Naruto knew that he was a strong Jonin with a flair for using visual illusions to hide his vector of attack. The former recon member glanced up at Naruto for a brief moment and nodded his greeting. Then, he went back to his newspaper as Naruto sat down next to him. Apart from the background noises, there was silence at the table. Naruto helped himself to the bottle of water on the table and poured himself a glass. Then, he peeked over Kage's shoulder as the man did the crossword. He was tapping his pen repetitively as he thought for a few moments, but was filling in the blank spaces rather quickly. Naruto read one of the clues, frowning. Watchful, he read out. Looking. Observing. Looking is 7, observing is 9. I need 8, Kage spoke tonelessly. He cocked his head, eyeing the puzzle carefully. Vigilant, which means 18 across must be victorious. He wrote the words down. 4-letter word being with an E. Clue otherwise. He paused. Else. In the next few moments, Cage finished the 100-clue crossword puzzle and folded the paper in half. As he tucked it away, Naruto saw that the rest crossword puzzles on the other side had been filled in with that neat, printed handwriting. Do you do many of them? Naruto asked curiously. 12 a day, Cage replied quietly. Then, he cocked his head, continuing on as if he felt the need to justify himself. I consider it training in order to improve my cognitive function. Good on you, was all Naruto said. Cage nodded. Some of the others have arrived, he said. Naruto looked over and saw a disgruntled Toa and a flushed Komaki entering the restaurant. Both Anbu operatives were refusing to look at each other, and the poor server looked extremely nervous as he pointed at the booth, sighing in relief as the obviously angry shinobi left. Komaki and Toa sat on the other side of the booth, Komaki placing both hands in her lap and looking down and Toa grunting as he sprawled over the seat, throwing his arm over the ledge. There was an awkward silence. Naruto and Cage exchanged a look. The other Anbu gave a slight shake of his head, his eyebrows slightly raised. Hello, Naruto said, although it came out as more of a question. Hello, Komaki and Toa replied in unison. Then, stiffening, they turned on each other, furious scowls on their faces. Don't talk when I'm talking, you jerk. Komaki snapped. A strand of her light brown hair fell out of place, dangling in front of her eyes, while a pair of senbon kept the rest of her hair in a bun. Oh, what, you're the boss of that now? Toa asked incredulously. He had his dark brown hair up in a spiky ponytail, and a series of crisscrossing red lines could be seen on his revealed arm. Get over yourself. Get over myself. Komaki repeated. She clenched her fists, glaring at her partner furiously. You're acting like this is my fault. You're the one who destroyed my new piece of art. That was art. Toa sounded amazed. It was a bunch of swirly lines and some colors. Where's the art in that? It used complementary colors to invite some color into a room with neutral colors. Komaki practically hissed. Or, at least it did before you threw a fucking fireball at it. Well, it's your own fault. Toa growled. He wrenched something off of his belt and revealed his Anbu mask. While they were normally white with black patterns adorning them, somebody had taken what seemed to be like a packet of crayons to it, decorating it with lovely rainbow swirls and scribbles. Cage let out a snort, and Naruto palmed his face, although a smile was crossing his lips. Both of them were ignored, however, as Komaki and Toa slammed their heads together, straining against the force the other was pushing against them. A rather deranged grin has crossed both of their faces, and their hands drifted down to their utility belts. For a moment, it looked like a full-blown fight was about to occur. And then Naruto calmly picked up his glass of water, gave it a little swirl, and chucked it directly at their faces. Both Anbu operatives backed away, Toa spluttering somewhat, and the tension was immediately diffused. Be nice, children, Naruto drawled as he put the glass down. Yeah, be nice, spoke a new voice, and Hyuga Daichi strode over, a bright smile on his face. Naruto grinned, feeling a rush of relief at the sight of the Hyuga. The older teen had been in intensive care for at least a week after the events of their last mission, and then he had been spirited away by the Hyuga clan. Naruto hadn't seen him since, and as he looked at the short-haired shinobi, he immediately noticed one difference. Where most Hyuga had various shades of white in their eyes, Daichi's had turned a murky gray. The blonde Anbu didn't say a thing as Daichi deliberately took a seat between Komaki and Toa, forcing Komaki into the corner and putting a little distance between her and Toa. Cage surveyed Daichi, scrutinizing the older teen. The Hyuga was probably 18 or 19, and looked just as cheerful as he had before he had sustained his injuries. He met Cage's stare evenly, and whatever the older Anbu member was looking for was apparently there, because Cage gave a short nod. You look well, was all he said. Thanks, boss, he said with a bright smile. Then, he frowned with an exaggerated pout. Actually, I guess you're not the boss anymore. What do I call you? Cage cocked his head, not looking bothered at all by the reminder of his effective demotion. Cage, he answered blankly. Right, Daichi said after a few moments. Yeah, not gonna be doing that. We'll come up with a suitable nickname for you. He peered around the table, suddenly realizing that somebody wasn't there. Wait, where's? Naruto felt a pair of arms wrap around him and he choked as his ribs were squeezed together. Strands of fine, blonde hair fell in front of his face, tickling his nose, as head appeared over Naruto's. Bright, blue eyes stared down at him, sparkling. Yay. Yuka squealed, squeezing Naruto even tighter. It's Captain Cutie. Komaki snorted, her bad mood evaporating, while Toa openly chuckled. Daichi just rolled his eyes as Yuka continued to fuss over Naruto, pinching at his cheeks and ruffling his hair in a manner reminiscent of Jiraiya. Just as Naruto was about to forcibly remove the rather nice-smelling girl, Kage moved forward. Off, he commanded. In his hand he held a squirt bottle, and he fired of a single stream, right at Yuka's face. Yuka spluttered and immediately backed away, wiping her face. Kage gestured to the only empty seat available right next to Naruto and spoke. Sit. Yuka obeyed immediately, scuttling into her seat and trying to look small. Komaki, Toa and Naruto shared rather bewildered glances, while Daichi winced in sympathy but made no effort to help Yuka. So, what's that? Toa asked in confusion. It's a spray bottle, Kage replied quietly. He looked down at the object in his hand. I rather thought that was obvious. I know what it is, Toa countered. But, he made a gesture between Kage and Yuka, then shrugged his shoulders. My great-aunt once had a cat, Kage said mildly as placed the bottle back into his cloak. It used to defecate everywhere. She bought a spray bottle. She sprayed the cat when it defecated. The cat stopped doing it. He angled his head. Simple classical conditioning. I merely took that example and applied it to my squad. Can you actually do that? As a former squad captain, Komaki looked quite interested. He shouldn't be allowed to, Daichi muttered. Kage looked at him. Daichi promptly shut up, sulking. Okay, Naruto said, desperate to break the sudden awkward silence. So, breakfast. Breakfast was a lively affair, and Yuka soon got over getting sprayed in the face. She seemed to be all over Naruto, pinching at his cheeks, cooing with an affectionate squeal, and mussing up his hair. Naruto took all with stoic silence, idly noting that the idea of her mussing up his hair was nowhere near as bad as Jiraiya. Plus, she had a nice smell, a girly fragrance that he quite liked. As they ate, they recounted what they had been doing since the last time they had come together as a team. Toa and I have been training the new rookies in Gamma Team, Komaki told them all as they ate. She lifted a glass of orange juice to her mouth, took a gulp, and continued. We're finally able to send off some of the reserves now that we've building up our numbers again. Which is fantastic, since there's nothing quite like a grumpy, 80-year-old ex-Anbu operative hobbling about whacking you with his walking stick, Toa muttered dryly. 80. Yuka was fascinated. Who lives that long? Somebody who used to be really good, Komaki answered. She shook her head, partly in awe. He's complete rubbish now, mind you, but he was telling us how he once fought the first Raikage in the First Great War, and how he saw the first Kazekage land the final blow. It was a massive free-for-all. Toa explained excitedly. His hands waved all around him as he gestured exaggeratedly. Divisions from every village were there, tens of thousands just trying to kill each other. At one point, every side lost communication with their superiors, so they just charged at each other. He trailed off. He made the third war sound like a couple of children arguing over crayons. Komaki interrupted snidely. Fuck you, Toa retorted. You wish, Komaki shot back. They glared at each other, ignoring Daichi in between them. The Hyuga, for his part, hadn't been up to anything exciting. The last 3 weeks had seen him up out of bed working on his Juken as he got his body back into shape. Yuka was biting her lip as Daichi spoke about how he even helped Hyuga Neji train for the Chunin exams, and as he kept talking, she finally interrupted. What's with the eyes, dude? She asked, then made an eep noise and covered her mouth. I'm so sorry. She apologized quickly. It's fine. Daichi waved it off with a slight smile. He traced over his eyes with his fingers. I don't know. It's a clan thing. I can see perfectly fine, and the Byakugan is okay. It's just, the injuries and the psychic shock, well, it took its toll. Yuka looked tearful, and she leapt across the table, tackling Daichi and giving him a big hug. Naruto watched on with a smile, and felt just a twinge of jealousy as he did so. Yuka was quick to move back to her seat and chatted on happily on how she had gone with other members of the Yamanaka clan on their annual flower exposition, visiting the capital and other major cities to show off the rare horticultural specimens the clan had collected over the decades. When it was Kage's turn, he shrugged. I trained, he said shortly. And Toa led, rolling his hands, prompting the older Anbu operative to continue. Kage considered it for a minute. I finished Konoha Weekly's Super 1000-word crossword puzzle in 47 minutes. That's good. It was subpar, Cage admitted with a shake of his head. He looked faintly annoyed. There was an Akamiki there who had it done in 43. I'm getting sloppy. The rest of the newly instated Sigma squad didn't know what to say to that. Okay, Naruto said brightly as the last of the plates were taken from the table. So, let's get down to business. Can you see everybody from down there? Yuka asked curiously, looking down on Naruto as he dangled his legs. It was a high seat, and Naruto was a little embarrassed to admit that the table had come up to his shoulders, making eating a little difficult. Toa snickered at Yuka's comment, and Komaki whispered in Daichi's ear and the Hyuga nodded, hitting Toa on the shoulder immediately afterwards. When the man scowled at him, Daichi jerked a thumb at Komaki, who smiled sweetly. Toa mouthed something rude at her, and she stuck the finger up in response. I can see fine, Naruto answered. Yuka cocked her head, her blonde hair glinting as the rising sun began to shine through the corner window. You can always sit on my lap, if you want, she teased, winking. Naruto considered it. Then, with a twitch of a smile, he answered. Okay. Yuka froze. What? Naruto was already moving, however, and he slid along the seat of the booth and climbed up onto Yuka's lap. The Yamanaka had frozen as Naruto wriggled around a bit, finding a comfortable spot, and then he leaned back on her chest. She was quite warm, Naruto would admit to himself privately later on, and it was actually a really nice feeling. Daichi was chuckling and Toa was waggling his eyebrows as Naruto continued on as if nothing had happened. He began from Yuka's lap, have a new recruit. Yuka stopped fussing from behind him. Everybody else perked up, paying close attention. From today, Uchiha Sasuke is going to joining Sigma Squad, the blonde Jinchuriki continued. Uchiha, Cage trailed off. I worked with his brother for a little while. Nobody said anything. I've got training ground 17 booked, Naruto told them. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Before we go there though, I just want to hear some ideas on what to do about his initiation. Uchiha Sasuke was up at 6, and he spent the first hour doing some stretches and going through his hand-to-hand exercises. The deserted Uchiha compound was silent, save for his grunts of exertions as he practiced his jabs on a battered training post. Although he lived at a small apartment in town, Sasuke made a point to visit the Uchiha compound to train. It helped inspire him. Breathing heavily, Sasuke listened to the sounds of birds chirping for a few minutes, and then he went inside and prepared his breakfast. It was a small one, and he wasn't sure just how difficult or strenuous the first day would be. After that, he climbed the stairs and entered the master bedroom. Staring vacantly at the spot where his mother and father had been murdered for a few moments, he walked past it and climbed on top of the master bed. A white plastic covered it and it crinkled and rustled as Sasuke put his weight on it. Then, cross-legged, he turned and faced the giant, ornate mirror that had been hung over the dresser. In the room where his brother had murdered his parents, and with the musty, acrid smell of dust mingled with dried blood that had never quite come out, Sasuke activated his Sharingan. A pair of crimson eyes stared back at him from the mirror, the two tomo appearing to spin lazily around the socket. Sasuke took a deep breath, inhaling the lingering scent of his father's cologne, and began working on some exercises. With his hand clasped together in a seal, he was there for 30 minutes. It was an exercise that he had once been told about, one that was meant to prepare him to use his Sharingan to force an ocular illusion upon an enemy. He didn't have to do it in that particular room, he just found that it helped his motivation. After that, he stripped out of his training clothes and placed them in the basket. It was almost full, and Sasuke would have to do the washing as soon as the day was over. Then, he showered, dressed in a pair of shorts and his blue, high-collared shirt, and tidied up the kitchen. Afterwards, he left the house, locking the door as he went, and walked through the empty district. Ever since the massacre, the sector had been mostly empty, subject only to the patrol routines of the Chunin military police. Leaving the compound, Sasuke found that his fists were tightened, his knuckles white, and a rather dark smile had crossed his face. So lost in his thoughts, he was completely unprepared as a blur of black and white appeared in front of him, and he only got a quick look at the Anbu mask before his world went dark. When he awoke, he found that he was lying down face first in the middle of a forest. He suppressed a groan and opened his eyelids a fraction. His heart was racing, adrenaline beginning to surge through his veins, and he darted his gaze around him as best he could without moving his head. There was nobody around him that he could see, and Sasuke kept his breathing steady. Then, in a quick, sudden movement, he rolled over and sprang to his feet. His Sharingan spun, his face tightened in a fierce glare as he looked for whoever had abducted him. The Anbu are the sword of Konoha. The monotone voice echoed around the forest clearing, and Sasuke spun around. His weapon pouches were still there, and a kunai appeared in his hand. An Anbu agent had appeared on the first branch of the nearest tree. Black lines adorned the mask, and from the voice, Sasuke deduced that the speaker was a fully grown man. We are the shield. Sasuke saw another Anbu appear, a female. Her shoulders were bare, her red tattoo revealed for the world to see, and she wore her light gray armor without a black cloak. Spiky light brown hair had been pinned up behind her head with a pair of thick senbon, and her voice was flat. We are the first to arrive at the fight. Another Anbu operative appeared, a man this time, with a spiky brown ponytail. He also had foregone the black cloak, and he had a series of red lines tattooed on one arm and his Anbu insignia tattooed on the other. His arms were folded, and there was a strange note in his voice. And we are the last to leave. This voice came from behind him. Sasuke angled his head, Sharingan spinning, as he saw the next operative drop onto the lowest branch of a tree. Slender, with black hair, and with the build and voice of somebody who hadn't reached full adulthood, this Anbu squatted there, watching him carefully. Our fates have already been decided. This was a young woman's voice, and a pair of slender legs swung underneath a branch as the female Anbu was revealed, watching him while resting her chin on her upturned palms. A mane of shiny, golden hair swished about as she swayed on the branch. In the end, we will all die for our village. The last voice was familiar, and Sasuke turned to see Uzumaki Naruto walking out from the tree line. He didn't wear his mask, his blue eyes blank. Light gray Anbu armor adorned his chest, and he wore a pair of trousers, a bandage wrapped around his thigh. His mask dangled from his belt, as well as several utility pouches, and he regarded Sasuke with a small smile. Uchiha Sasuke, he said loudly. You have been called to serve. He snapped his fingers, and the Anbu in the trees disappeared with a silent flicker of movement. They reappeared behind him, flanking him unison, and Naruto walked forward. Sasuke remained there, his fists clenched and emotion welling within, and he let the Anbu surround him in a loose circle. Naruto walked into the circle and stood before him. Will you answer the call? The blonde boy asked, and held out his hand. Sasuke eyed it, and moved to take it, but then Naruto pulled it back. The Uchiha sent him a quizzical look, and Naruto smiled faintly. Then he moved behind Sasuke, and the dark-haired boy didn't move as a blindfold was put over his eyes. He stood there, his vision black, his ears prickling at every small sound. The wind blew over his body and he could feel trickles of sunlight beam down on him from the morning sun. Rather do we want you to answer the call. One voice said. Anbu operatives need to be strong. Came another. They need to be determined. This was older of the women. They need to follow the directives. And that was the youngest. The directives of the Anbu division of the village hidden in leaves, this was definitely Naruto's voice. Directive 1 at all times must an Anbu preserve the will of fire, ensuring the safety and security of the village of Konoha and her inhabitants, young and old. This supersedes any and all other orders. Directive 2 an Anbu operative must be willing to give up their life to protect the embodiment of the will of fire, the current reigning Hokage of the village hidden in leaves and the daimyo of the fire country, and the great village hidden in leaves. Directive 3 an Anbu operative must obey the chain of command and follow orders to the best of his or her ability. The chain of command starts with the reigning Hokage of the village, to the commander-in-chief of the Anbu division, to platoon captains and ends with squad leaders. Directive 4 an Anbu operative must take the orders of the reigning Hokage with priority and before other duties. Directive 5 an Anbu operative must have a mind that will not yield, able to endure hard work, training and the rigors of combat. Directive 6 an Anbu operative must be healthy in mind and body, willing and able to reach their peak performance in order to attend to their duties. Directive 7 to preserve the security and secrecy of the village hidden in leaves, no Anbu operative must be left behind on the field of battle alive or dead. There was a long silence as Sasuke digested what he had just been told. These are the directives that the Anbu live by, Naruto said quietly from in front of him. Do you understand? Yes, Sasuke answered softly. He swallowed nervously, taking a deep breath and nodding. Yes, I understand, he repeated. There was a rustling noise in front of him. Be wary, said the teenage girl's voice. For we have many enemies. From out of nowhere came a spray of water and Sasuke was drenched from head to toe. He spluttered, spitting some of it out, his clothes sodden and sticking to his skin. He raised a hand to clean his ear as the water dripped from him. There was a strange, gurgling noise from in front of him, and then Naruto abruptly spoke. Be wary of the village hidden in mist, for they are powerful with their water techniques. Then, Sasuke staggered back as a series of muddy clods struck him. One hit him right in the face and he grimaced. It wasn't painful, but the taste of mud was on his tongue and he had to wipe the thick goo off to breathe properly. There was a hasty cough, and somebody in front of him stepped away. Beware of the village hidden in rock, for they are plenty with their earth techniques. Sasuke tensed for the next one and it probably made things worse. He let out a very undignified yelp as something shocked him, a current of power that sent every muscle twitching. He jerked and twitched, and glared from behind his mask as he definitely heard somebody masking a laugh. Be wary of the village hidden in clouds, for they have lots of lightning techniques that'll totally rip you apart into little pieces, and the dead animals will come and feast on your remains as you lay there. Ow. The operative was cut off by a meaty thud, obvious a strike. There was a short pause. Be wary of the village hidden in sand, came the voice of the teenage girl, but she trailed off. Because, there was a note of uncertainty in her voice, because, they might throw sand at you. She declared dramatically. Sasuke just sighed and let a clod of sand hit him in the face. He spat out the lightly powdered stuff, shaking his head and rolling his eyes beneath his blindfold. You must be strong, like the village hidden in leaves is strong, Naruto declared. Feel our strength. Then, Sasuke was crushed as a huge mass came falling down on him with the rustle of leaves and branches. He fell to one knee, fighting through the torrent of weight, feeling dead leaves and twigs crush underneath his hands. He rose up with his blindfold still intact, coming out from the obvious pile of leaves to a round of chuckles and laughter. Uchiha Sasuke. Naruto's voice was warm, and a pair of hands took of his blindfold. Sasuke blinked, and looked down at himself. Wet, dirty, covered in mud and sand, hair standing out at every end, and up to his waist in dead leaves, he shook his head resignedly. Naruto stood before him, flanked by the Anbu operatives, each who had taken off their masks. The young blonde put his hand out again, staring into Sasuke's Sharingan without fear. Will you answer the call? He asked quietly. Sasuke raised his arm and they shook hands. Naruto smiled. Welcome aboard. The other agents had taken off their masks, and Naruto began introducing them. That's Kage, he's a close combat specialist, great with a blade, excellent stealth, Naruto was saying. Sasuke stared at the rather plain man, who nodded at him with absolutely no emotion. Then there's Toa over there. He's got this cool seal etched into his arm, and it lets him make any weapon he wants. It's really handy, he can go in for close combat and stand back for ranged attacks. Toa waved lazily. Then there's Daichi, he's a Hyuga, so expect him to dominate in hand to hand. The Hyuga gave a cheerful thumbs up. And then there's Komaki. She's a Jonin, very good with Senbon and wire attacks, and she's even got some medical training in there. She'll probably save your life. Komaki shook his hand very professionally. Then the annoying blonde over there is Yuka. She's a Yamanaka, and specializes in auditory and visual illusionary techniques. If she pinches your cheeks, punch her. Well, the blonde teenager said thoughtfully, one finger on her lips. He is pretty cute, but not as cute as my Captain Cutie. She squealed, sounding eerily like her relative Ino. She made a move to come towards Naruto, but the blonde had somehow produced a spray bottle from somewhere, and the Yamanaka eeped and moved backwards, her hands up. This is really good. Naruto sounded amazed, and he eyed the bottle with something like reverence. What is it? Sasuke asked, looking confused. Naruto turned around and sprayed him in the face. Sasuke spluttered, waving his hands in front of his face frantically. What was that for? He demanded. What was that for, sir? Naruto corrected and sprayed him again. It didn't hurt, but it was really annoying. Nonetheless, Sasuke took the hint. Don't worry, Toa cheerfully called from across the clearing. We've got a week to get you up to speed on the basics. And there's lots to learn, Komaki murmured. But before we do, there's one more thing we need to do before your spot here is really permanent, Naruto said. Naruto entered the Hokage's office, the rest of Sigma Squad flanking out behind him. His face blank, Naruto knelt down before the Hokage, and the rest of the Anbu operatives did as well. Uchiha Sasuke stood there for a moment, surprise visible on his face, but then he too knelt down. The third Hokage stared over them from behind his desk, his elbows on the table as he rested his chin on his knuckles. Sasuke felt the third Hokage look at him and was suddenly glad that he had his eyes on the floor. There was an unusual tension in the room, and the Uchiha swallowed. Rise. It was not the voice of the Hokage. An Anbu operative had appeared from behind the Hokage. He didn't even slide in from the shadows one moment, he was not there, and the next he was. Naruto and the rest of Sigma Squad rose, and Sasuke followed suit. He gazed at the new Anbu operative. Unlike the other Anbu he had seen, this one wore a mask of pure, gleaming silver. There was something about him, a certain edge to the way he stood, and Sasuke suddenly had the strangest feeling that this new Anbu agent was one of the strongest people he had ever met. Ferret. The Anbu with the silver mask spoke. Sasuke was assuming that this Anbu was male, but after hearing the genderless, synthesized voice that held both bass and treble tones, he wasn't quite sure. Commander, Naruto returned quietly. Sasuke couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Ferret. Was that Naruto's codename? I am interested to know why you have inducted a new member into the Special Assassination and Tactical Squad without my express permission. The Anbu agent, the commander, spoke. Sasuke couldn't detect any emotion in that heavily synthesized voice, but he got the feeling that the commander was not pleased. Naruto evidently got the same impression because his shoulders squared back just a tad, and he leveled a blank gaze towards the commander. As the Anbu fall under the purview of the Hokage, and Sigma Squad represents his persona interests, I wasn't aware that I needed your express permission, Naruto said very carefully. He gestured at the Hokage, who sat there, watching. I really only need his. The Anbu commander cocked his or her head. You would defy me on this. Even if you were right, you could be making a powerful enemy here. I could, Naruto admitted. He shrugged. I guess I might. The Anbu commander considered that. Why? Naruto thought about it for a moment, his face strangely pensive. Around him, his squad remained at attention, armored and masked. Because I said I would, he answered finally. The Anbu commander chuckled a truly odd sound, and once again Sasuke couldn't tell if it was a laugh of amusement or rising anger. Very well. The third Hokage moved for the first time, his dark eyes peering out from his red and white conical hat. Sasuke felt pinned by the man's look as the Hokage looked over him with disinterest. The Uchiha could barely believe that this was the same man who would visit the academy and tease the students. Here, he was somebody completely different. Uchiha Sasuke, the third Hokage began quietly. You have come highly recommended by current Anbu operative Uzumaki Naruto as a possible recruit for the Special Assassination and Tactical Squad. After reviewing your record and speaking with your Jonin sensei, I have decided to agree to Naruto's request. From this day forward, you have been allocated to the ANBU Sigma Squad, under the purview of Uzumaki Naruto, for a probationary period of 1 month. The Anbu commander shifted. This is unprecedented. Strangely, it didn't really come off as a criticism, merely an observation. There are protocols for this. When have they ever stopped me, old friend? Sarutobi countered with a quiet murmur. Do they truly have relevance here? I should hope so. The Anbu commander said after a beat. You wrote half of them, if I recall correctly. Sarutobi paused. Ah, well, look at Naruto's face, he said, and gestured. The blonde ANBU's face remained impassive, his eyes blank. He's like a little puppy that wants his treat. Could you deny that face? The Anbu commander turned to look at Naruto. Then, the commander turned back to the Hokage. Yes, of course you could, the Hokage replied with a chuckle. A faint, almost affectionate smile adorned his face. That's why you're my commander. Nonetheless, my decision stands. The Hokage rose and moved from behind his desk. Naruto took a step back, and Sasuke was left in the middle of the office. The Hokage stood in front of him, his hands clasped. You have heard the directives of the Anbu, Sarutobi spoke, and Sasuke wondered how the old man knew that. Do you agree to abide by them, through life's trials until death's rest? Sasuke's mouth was dry, and he could barely rein in his anticipation. His fists were clenched, his mouth dry, and he struggled to form words for a few moments. Finally, he felt his mouth moving, almost of its own accord. Yes, he whispered hoarsely. The Anbu commander came to stand next to Sasuke, and the Uchiha felt the sleeve of his right arm pulled up. The commander held out a hand, and Sasuke saw a flicker of red light and tiny little squiggles that looked like writing. Then, the commander slapped his palm down on the arm and Sasuke flinched. There was pain, a burning sensation that seemed to go into the very bone, and the Uchiha grunted. His Sharingan was activated, more by instinct than by choice. He rode out the pain, and it only lasted for a little while longer. Then the commander stood back and Sasuke looked down at his arm. The spiraled shape of the Anbu insignia had been branded there, but it was black, not red like everybody else's. The Hokage held out a hand, and made a hand seal. Uchiha Sasuke. By the authority of the seat of the Hokage, I hereby induct you into the Special Assassination and Tactical Squad, the Anbu. You are now an operative responsibly for the security and safety of this village, and the Land of Fire. Where other shinobi will take missions for profit and money, you shall not. Your only goal is to protect this nation from all threats, both foreign and domestic. He paused. You will be asked to commit acts that will be morally reprehensible. The Hokage's voice was heavy, but strong. And you will do these acts, knowing that your bloodied hands are just one more sacrifice that you make for the safety and security of the village. Sasuke felt a burning sensation on his arm, not as painful as before, but every bit as strong. Before his eyes, the blackened tattoo came to life as it adopted a reddish color, and Sasuke could feel a pulse of chakra shoot through his body that did not belong to him. Uchiha Sasuke. Welcome to the Anbu. The Anbu commander spoke. Sasuke bowed his head as the Hokage stood back, and the mood of the room seemed to lighten as the old man gave a gentle smile. Perhaps you'd like to take him to the HQ and show him around, Naruto, the Hokage suggested. Naruto nodded, and with one last bow, Sigma Squad, including their new recruit, Uchiha Sasuke, left the Hokage's office. The Hokage and Anbu commander remained there a little longer. Is this truly a wise idea? The Anbu commander asked as the Sarutobi made his way back to his desk. The closer he is to Anbu, the more likely it is that the secret of the Uchiha clan will be. Stop, the Hokage interrupted. He took a deep breath, and gave a heavy sigh. I am an old man, my friend, wearied and full of regrets. Perhaps one of the largest of them just stood in this room. The old man turned to stare out the window. If it makes him happy, then so be it. Sasuke will remain in Anbu. The Anbu commander's head dipped in acknowledgement. Besides, Naruto will be a good influence, the Hokage added. He pressed his fingertips together. He will guide Sasuke's hatred into productive uses, and perhaps, the bond that they will develop will benefit them both. Should the truth ever be revealed, his experiences in the Anbu just might make Sasuke understand why we did what we did. The Anbu commander stood there for a few moments. Then, just as the Hokage sighed and turned on his chair, looking ready to get back into his paperwork, the commander spoke. He will not forgive us. Sarutobi smiled somewhat bitterly. I would not expect him to, he answered honestly. His face hardened. Nor would I ask for it. Dismissed, Commander. The Anbu commander left the room, leaving the third Hokage to his thoughts. In a way, Uchiha Sasuke took to his basic training better than Naruto ever had. In all fairness, Sasuke had started the training at the age of 12 while Naruto had started at a far earlier age. The difference in size, physique and strength was especially noticeable. Naruto had not been promoted to Chunin at the age of 8 on the basis of his combat skills, or talent, or mettle. When Sarutobi had plucked Naruto from the academy, Naruto had been as untrained as they had come. The promotion was simply for the sake of convenience. Here, Sasuke had earned his promotion. Combined with innate talent, and aided with the power of the Sharingan, in a single week Sasuke had picked up the entirety of Anbu hand code, and had a working knowledge of the rules, regulations and procedures. However, in terms of tactics and strategy, it had still yet to be determined what particular niche the Uchiha would fill. I dunno, boss, Yuka said thoughtfully. She dangled her legs underneath the tree branch, her blonde hair swaying in the wind. It's hard to tell. Naruto sat beside her, his elbow on his knee and his chin resting on his closed fist as he stared down at the spar beneath him. Uchiha Sasuke was panting as Toa ran circles around him. The older, bigger, and more experienced Anbu was pushing Sasuke to the brink of his limits, forcing every iota of strength out from the tired Uchiha. Sasuke was exhausted, his eyes bloodshot, his muscles trembling and his chakra spent, his Sharingan long faded back to his normal obsidian eyes. Toa, on the other hand, was showing some slight tiredness, but otherwise seemed fine. He held a glowing crimson sword, activated from the unique seals that had been imprinted in his arm. With a quick hand seal, the sword shimmered and retracted back into the seal, which glowed with a bright red light before fading to black. He nodded at Sasuke, and the boy managed to let out a feeble groan before he collapsed to the ground, exhausted beyond words. We could tailor him to suit any number of roles, Cage spoke up from the tree branch behind him. The enigmatic operative had finished sharpening his dull black blade and was now wiping it down with an oily rag. He eyed Sasuke clinically, even as the boy let out a single twitch. His evasion skills are high, and his speed is adequate. With some training, he could become a close combat specialist, or a long-distance fighter. With his Sharingan, we could give him a blade and he would be effective, just as if we had him study Genjutsu. Naruto made a humming noise in the back of his throat. His face was scrunched up into a contemplative frown, and the moment was only ruined when Yuka let out the squealing noise that had grown to exasperate him and ruffled his hair. Look at you, all serious and cool looking, she cooed. No, wait, don't, gar. Cage dropped the squirt bottle. Bad Yuka, he deadpanned. Down. Yuka folded her arms, pouting. Naruto found that he was almost annoyed by Cage's intervention. Sure, Yuka was kind of annoying, but she was also kind of pretty and girly and she smelled really nice. Then, he shook his head and gritted his teeth. Damn it. This was Jiraiya-sama's fault. That stupid old pervert. He focused back on the issue at hand. For now, he'll stay in reserve, Naruto declared. He rubbed his hands together. We'll use him as a general operative to start off with. If we teach him a bit of everything, he can fill in when necessary. We'll sort out his niche later. Naruto stood up and leapt off the branch. He landed effortlessly on the ground, hearing a crunch of leaves and twigs as both Yuka and Cage landed next to him. Komaki was already crouching beside the newest recruit, her hands glowing with a warm green light as she tended to his exhaustion, while Toa was holding a drink bottle to the Uchiha's mouth, letting the boy drink from it. Sasuke's utterly drained eyes flickered towards Naruto, who smiled brightly. Having fun? The blonde asked cheerfully, coming down to kneel by the other boy's side. He patted Sasuke on the head, almost like one would pat a pet. Don't worry. We're only just getting started. Sasuke made a noise in the back of his throat, something gurgling and desperate. Naruto made a skeptical face. That was either a whimper of fear or a cry of joy. He turned to Yuka. What do you think, Yuka, fear or joy? Definitely fear, boss, Yuka answered with a grin. Our level of training will not exceed the maximum threshold as prescribed in village legislation and Anbu policy, Cage offered, although with his blank tone it was hard to tell if he was teasing or being reassuring. Naruto paused at that, and looked at Cage. Does our policy actually have a maximum threshold? He asked curiously. No. Cage gave a slight shrug. I was trying to make him feel better. Naruto glanced down at Sasuke, who was beginning to regain movement in his arms. Good work, he deadpanned. Cage looked down at Sasuke as well. Thank you, he replied. Sasuke managed to survive his entry-level training. Sore, bruised and exhausted, he nonetheless limped back home every night alive and well. On the 6th day, Naruto toned down the level of training and the group began working on some team exercises. Sasuke struggled to find his place, especially given all of the roles he was supposed to fill at the drop of a hat. It was a good plan in theory, have a reserve member hang back, waiting to fill a gap in the line, although it was somewhat morbid. Generally speaking, Sasuke would only need to fill a gap if one of them had fallen out of formation, or gotten themselves wounded or killed. Nonetheless, after the week had ended, Naruto felt that it was time to get out Konoha. Training was all well and good, but the experience a team could get on a mission was invaluable. Yes, Team Sigma needed a mission. No, Sarutobi thundered. Naruto winced at the volume, entirely unperturbed even as the rest of Team Sigma straightened, and given how formal they were being, that was saying something. He raked a hand through his spiky blonde hair, rolling his blue eyes. For his part, the third Hokage sat behind his office desk, clad in the white and red robes of the job, and he was shaking his head, waggling a finger down at Naruto. Your request is denied, the Hokage snapped, although with no real heat behind his words. He huffed in disgust. Why on earth you thought I would give you a mission given your history, I'll never know. Naruto was prepared to at least try to be professional after all, his squad mates were all discreetly watching. After that, though, his mouth dropped. What do you mean, my history? He snapped indignantly. I've got a great track record, thanks very much. The Hokage took out his pipe and puffed on it frantically. Almost immediately, he sighed in relief and relaxed into his chair. Do you see what you've driven me to, my foolish student? He held up the gleaming wooden pipe. This is not good for me, yet I ironically need it to keep the stress down and the inevitable heart attack at bay. I drove you to that for 50 years. What, from beyond the womb? Naruto retorted. He folded his arms in a huff, his eye twitching. Damn it, just give us a mission. Sarutobi leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Every time I send you on a mission, something unfortunate goes down and you wind up being completely over your head. He thundered, his voice echoing throughout the silent room. He paused, closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then, he took another puff on the pipe and leaned back. When he spoke again, his voice was much calmer. And thus, no. My missions do not always, Naruto began heatedly. Sarutobi interrupted. Recon patrol led to an invasion of Konoha, he countered, ticking it off with his finger. Another recon patrol led to a battle with an evil cult. Yet another recon patrol led to a fight with my traitorous student. He gave Naruto a significant look. Are you seeing a pattern? Firstly, Naruto began from between gritted teeth. I didn't start the invasion, but I sure as hell finished it. I saved the village. He paused, cocking his head. And a princess. That's 2 out of 3. Actually, he continued, turning to Sasuke thoughtfully. That's 3 for 3, since I saved his team, and Sasuke is kind of like a princess. The Uchiha twitched at that, looking somewhat befuddled. Naruto heard Toa snort from behind his mask, and Yuka's failed attempt to hold in a giggle. He is very feminine, Sarutobi agreed, nodding sagely. So, Naruto held out his arms. Mission. Sarutobi stared down at him. Naruto stared back. There was a beat. No. Damn it. Naruto cursed, making a fist. Sarutobi snorted. He nodded at Sasuke. Has that boy even received his mask yet? Naruto trailed off. Idiot. A large book came and smacked Naruto dead in the head, sending him sprawling down to the ground. The blonde Anbu sprung up easily after the blow, the book hand. Sarutobi looked disgruntled as Naruto wordlessly passed it back to him. Fine. Get him a mask and come back. I'll have a mission for you by then. Naruto grinned and waved. Thanks, boss. Go away already, Sarutobi grumbled. He swiveled his chair to look out the window. It's far too nice a day to spend it conversing with you. Naruto turned to his squad. From the way Komaki and Kage were eyeing him, they had apparently never seen one of his little arguments with the Hokage before. Sasuke was also looking at him strangely, but not within the same disbelieving way as the others. What do you mean, princess? He asked somewhat stiffly. You are very pretty, Yuka teased, running her hand through the Uchiha's hair. Sasuke swatted it away, scowling, and the Yamanaka laughed. Right, let's go and pick up your mask, Naruto said, rubbing his hands together gleefully as he smiled brightly. I ordered it made last week, so the smith should be done. You'll like it too, I chose it specifically for you. Oh, God, Sasuke muttered despairingly. Sasuke stared at the small wooden box that had been brought out before him. He stood within the depths of Anbu HQ, the deep, darkened underground facilities directly beneath the Hokage's tower. The smith had been hard at work on his mask for the last week. The ceramic-like material was strong enough to block kunai and shuriken and light enough to ensure full mobility during combat. The intricate array of seals, which had been on the inside of the mask, allowed an operative to see the world around them through the solid material. These seals could even diminish the effect of flash bombs and provided an operative with limited night vision, while the air that an operative took through the mask was filtered, screening out all but the most potent of airborne toxins. Sasuke's mask was somewhat different than the others. Should he choose to, Sasuke could take off the top half of his faceplate, revealing his eyes and the bridge of his nose while still keeping his air supply filtered. It was unorthodox, but common for previous Uchiha members of the Anbu. The Sharingan was a versatile tool, and a skilled Uchiha could make eye contact with an enemy and ensnare them in a terrible illusion. For that to happen, however, the Sharingan must be laid bare for the enemy to see. The mask was a powerful tool. It offered a great many useful functions for any shinobi. It was difficult to create. It was expensive. It was rare. Sasuke didn't want it. What's that? He asked flatly, pointing at the painted lines around his mask. Is that? Next to him, Naruto smiled. That would be the marks that designate your Anbu codename, he answered. The blonde scratched the back of his head. Your codename isn't classified. It's really just a tradition. So the spots? Sasuke asked quietly, his fists clenching. They're part of your codename, Naruto supplied helpfully. And the colored stripes? Sasuke continued flatly. Also just part of your codename. And my codename is, Sasuke trailed off, feeling the urge to palm his face. Next to him, Naruto grinned and slapped Sasuke on the back. Welcome to Team Sigma, Operative Peacock. Sasuke really didn't like the name, and his feelings much have shown on his face, because Naruto gave him a nudge with his elbow. Don't forget that my codename is Ferret, he remarked glibly. Sasuke nodded at that, but then a suspicious thought occurred to him. Hang on, he said after a pause. He whirled upon his new captain, who stood back grinning like a fool. Who chooses the codenames? He demanded with a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. Oh, well. Naruto waved the question away lazily, a manner that Sasuke thought would have suited Kakashi just fine. Does it matter? I mean, life goes on. The sky is blue, the grass is green, and Uchiha Sasuke is a peacock. Now, put that pretty bird's mask on and let's go back for our mission. Oh, God, Sasuke muttered despairingly. It was becoming somewhat of a familiar phrase for him. Uzumaki Naruto and Team Sigma stood cloaked and masked before the third Hokage. The old man sat behind his desk, puffing on his pipe as he reviewed a document before him, utterly ignoring the presence of his soldiers. The Anbu operatives, of course, waited with the pretense of patience. Some, like Cage, stood there stoically, and would have been happy to stand there all day if that was what had been ordered. Some, like Sasuke, could feel his legs beginning to spasm. Military drill and protocol had never been his strong suit, and the Uchiha had tended to slouch around everywhere with his hands in his pockets. After standing perfectly still in the same place for 15 minutes, it was beginning to take its toll on him. Some, like Naruto, were scowling behind their masks, but the moment Naruto put on his mask, he adopted an air of professionalism and respect for the venerated leader of his village, or, at least, he did so in front of other people. After a few more minutes, the third Hokage sighed. He placed the document on the table and, with a flourish, signed it. Then he rolled it up, bound it with string and lazily chucked at Naruto. The blonde Anbu captain caught it. I'm assigning you a simple mission, Sarutobi spoke. He shook his head almost despairingly. Although it is my belief that you will nevertheless cock it up somehow, I simply cannot have my hand-picked Anbu squad sitting on their backsides all day. Naruto twitched. You are to escort a member of the Fire Lord's Council to his holding at Winter's Keep. The Hokage pressed his fingertips together. Lord Shinji is a businessman and a trade baron, and he is held in very high regard by the Fire Lord. As such, this mission warrants a greater and more prolific force than is technically required, and the danger level is low. Do you understand? Naruto thought he did. Lord Shinji was an important guy to the Fire Lord, so by having the third Hokage's personal Anbu squad escort him would send a message and a statement and all of that subtle, underneath stuff that Naruto struggled with. He nodded. Good, Sarutobi said with a sigh. Dismissed and try not to blow anything up. Lord Shinji was a large, round portly man dressed in fine, crimson and purple robes. He wore clogs on his feet and his toenails were finely manicured and painted yellow. He was a man somewhere in his 40s, with the loops and curls that were favored by the nobles of the Fire Court. From what Naruto could tell, he was a man who had gained the favor of the Fire Lord by shifting large amounts of money into the royal coffers. Shinji had business dealings that spanned the entire world, and his pudgy, soft fingers could be found in almost every notable organization and company in the Land of Fire. Naruto and his Anbu squad had been assigned to guard Shinji and his entourage. There were at least 20 of them, many who held up Shinji's palanquin while the overweight noble sat on his cushions, poring over bundles of paperwork. On the top of palanquin was a miniature aviary, and within was a flock of trained messenger birds. Every so often, Lord Shinji would withdraw a bird and send off a message. Sometimes the birds returned, sometimes they did not. At one point, Naruto spotted the large, bulky man frowning as he sent out another messenger, the third for that morning, but he paid no attention to it as the carriage kept trudging forward. They were moving at a slow pace, but it really didn't matter. They were traveling on one of the Land of Fire's main highways, heading southwest to one of the Land of Fire's most significant holdings. Winter's Keep and the outlying towns and villages were the center of economic trade between the Land of Fire, the Land of River and the Land of Wind, and Shinji ruled it all. The city had garnered its name because of the curious geography where it had been built. The Land of Fire had its seasonal changes, but it was very unlikely for the temperature to fall below zero, and snow was rarely seen except in one place. Winter's Keep had been built at the very bottom of a valley that, for some unknown reason, had a completely different climate than the rest of the Land of Fire. The temperature difference from inside and outside the valley could differ as much as 20 degrees, and there was always a layer of snow covering the ground and the large, tall pine trees. Nobody had ever been able to explain it, but it had made Winter's Keep a very popular tourist destination, a huge importer of lumber for firewood, and a natural wonder of the world. It had only ever been a tourist destination until Lord Shinji had rose to prominence, and now money flowed to and from the city in a never-ending stream of trade. Nothing eventful happened during the 4-day journey. Naruto used the time to run Sasuke through some more team exercises as they rotated through defensive formations. Lord Shinji didn't seem to mind actually, he clapped and cheered during one of the few breaks he took from his work as Naruto and Team Sigma staged a false attack. The combination of Naruto, Kage and Yuka had dove onto the triad formation of Toa, Sasuke, Komaki and Daichi, metal clanging against metal in showers of sparks. It had been a rather close fight, although the proximity of Lord Shinji had left Naruto, the ninjutsu specialist, rather outmatched by Daichi and Toa's close combat talents. Still, despite his burning muscles and the sheen of sweat that glistened on his brow, Naruto was quick enough to keep them at bay if not outright defeat them, while Yuka was pushed back by Sasuke, his Sharingan whirling behind his half-masked face. An unfortunate matchup, her genjutsu were no match for the power of a two-tomo Sharingan, and she had to rely on her natural agility to avoid Sasuke's superior hand-to-hand and weapon skills. Komaki and Kage were rather evenly matched as well, so the exercise took far longer than necessary, but it was a good workout and they all came out from it feeling rather satisfied. Naruto was feeling good about the team. Sasuke was quiet and withdrawn, but Yuka was really good and needling a reaction out of him, and many a times Naruto had caught the flirtatious blonde forcing an unwilling blush and scowl out of the repressed boy. Nonetheless, so far Sasuke was shaping up to be somebody who would fit into the team quite well. He would have been happy to continue the team exercises for another day, but the carriage soon approached Lord Shinji's holding at Winter's Keep, and they began to descend into a valley. Large trees arose from within it, and even as they descended Naruto could see a dozen maybe more other roads leading down towards the darkened valley. The sky began to dim as they entered into the range of dark, angry clouds. The trees surrounded them, blotting out the sun as the air began to take on an unnatural chill. In the span of an hour, the climate had gone from warm, pleasant and sunny to teeth-rattling cold. Shinji's entourage had come prepared and they had soon donned their winter coats of fur, while the Anbu team shrugged off the coldness with practiced ease, white mist billowing out of their mask with every breath. Winter's Keep loomed, a giant city in the midst of a storm of snow. The first thing that became apparent was the giant spire that arose from the center of the city, the Land of Fire's seat of power of the region and the stronghold of the representative of the Fire Court. It was as tall as the Hokage's tower, made from blackened brick and stone, and looked somewhat foreboding as it loomed over the smaller buildings and houses around it. Naruto couldn't really see much of the rest of the city, for the snow piled around their vision as it gently fell from the darkened sky. The carriage continued on unheeded though, the paved road staying miraculously dry and free from ice and snow. As they trundled down towards the city, Naruto caught a glimpse of a pair of small obsidian obelisks laid out on each side of the road every so often. Made from the same material as the spire, they had been etched with seals, which glowed with a faint dim light, a mechanism undoubtedly there to keep the routes open and the traffic of trade flowing. Yet, as the carriage approached the outer limits of the city, it became apparent that something was not quite right. They passed only a few other carriages, most of them leaving the city at a rather harried pace. Then, as they came to the outskirts of Winter's Keep, Naruto became grimly aware that not all was quite right. There was tension in the air, one made up of 1,000 little things: the stares that many of the populace threw the carriage, the way women huddled their children away as Lord Shinji passed, and the feeling of 1,000 eyes looking at them. Lord Shinji's entourage had felt it too, and they moved closer to the carriage, while Naruto straightened and signaled his team. In a flash of movement, Kage and Komaki withdrew from their mobile sentry positions and moved closer to the carriage. The rest of Team Sigma took positions around them, becoming a visible and obviously heavily armed presence around Lord Shinji. The hostility of those they passed lessened, replaced with caution and at times outright fear, but even as more and more men and women moved to avoid them, the eyes that watched them never decreased. Naruto was sporting a frown behind his mask. Under Lord Shinji, there had never been a serious instance of civil unrest or rebellion in Winter's Keep, yet the atmosphere read of a riot that only needed a spark to start. Something was wrong, and as Lord Shinji sent off the last of his messenger birds, he had the sinking suspicion that whoever he was writing to within the city wasn't going to respond. He was right. After 15 minutes, there had still been no response. Naruto thought about delaying the carriage, and he offered the suggestion to Lord Shinji, but the noble adamantly refused, and so they continued. Unfortunately, as the procession moved closer to the spire at the center of the city, that likelihood of that spark kindling a fire became greater. The closer they got, the larger the groups became, and mulish stares began to turn into dark mutters and sneering faces. Most of them didn't even seem to notice the carriage, courtesy of a well-placed avoidance genjutsu by Yuka, but the cacophony of shouts and hollers accompanying the crowds were worrying. The spire loomed above them closer as they neared the destination, but then the road before them was suddenly blocked and the carriage came to a halt. Although the gates to the spire were only a couple of 100 meters away, there was no way they were going to be able to get through the crowd unnoticed. Before them was a giant crowd, numbering in the hundreds and the thousands. Hordes of men and women stood before them, their faces grimy with soot and dirt and their hands calloused and rough. They yelled incoherently, waving fists with fury, spittle flying from their mouths. They stood in front of the gates, held back by only a few dozen. Naruto spotted a member of the Chunin military police standing on top of the gate, her face ashen and grim as she shouted at the crowd, trying to calm them down. Beneath her were dozens of men and women, clad in padded leather armor and brandishing large shields and batons. Their postures were defensive and wary, and they huddled behind their man-sized shields as all around them the crowd screamed and hollered. Naruto assessed the situation in a single glance, and gave a slight shake of his head. There were only 7 shinobi in the bunch, and 4 of them looked like genin messengers, while one was covered in bandages and was swaying on his feet. Where were the rest of the Chunin officers? Many of the crowd were waving signs, while a small number of others hurled rocks and other miscellaneous objects that belted against the tall shields of the guard. They seemed unorganized and angry, yet many of them flocked around a large man in the front, one who was dressed in rough furs and sported a thick, crimson mop of hair. His beard quavered, he yelled out, his indistinct booming voice rising above the crowd, making an impatient gesture with his hands. The crowd responded with fervor to whatever he was saying and roared with approval as the man gestured and nodded at something. Before the eyes of the procession, a pillar of fire arose. It was with dawning horror and rising fury that Naruto watched an effigy of the Hokage catch fire and began burn, casting a blazing yellow light around the crowd. An angry chant filled the air, and Naruto clenched his fists. Treason. There can only be one king. There can only be one king. There can only be one king. The crowd chanted. The words struck a chord within Naruto, and he remembered what happened the last time somebody had been saying those words. His hands flew and he signed to his fellow members. Komaki, Toa, primary mission objective discard carriage escort priority objective to safety. Komaki and Toa nodded instantly. They darted over to the carriage, still held underneath the power of an avoidance genjutsu, grabbed a protesting Lord Shinji and disappeared in a flash. His attendants muttered and looked nervous, many of them starting to back away from the crowd now that the presence of their lord no longer held them there. Naruto ignored them and continued giving orders. Daichi, Yuka, Sasuke, form flanking formation Bravo 4, move to assist local. Then, in a flash, whatever plans that Naruto was making were obliterated. At the very corner of his eye, Naruto caught a flicker of light on one of the nearby rooftops, an apartment building at first glance. It was pure chance, the flames of the bonfire casting a brilliant light that, for a single instant, gleamed off of metal. Something flashed through the air, propelled with great speed and unnerving accuracy. At the head of the crowd, the large red-haired man let out a pained holler as kunai slammed into him, tearing through his furs and embedding themselves deep in his chest arms. At the same time, the Chunin police officer, who had so far been doing a fine job in avoiding projectiles, abruptly froze. Something was jutting out of her neck, but Naruto didn't have the chance to see anything else as a thrown glass bottle smashed into the woman's head and she fell out of sight. There was a sudden hush. Both the crowd and the officers loomed stunned, and for a few seconds, the yells died down into nothingness. The burly, bearded man raised a shaky arm, gurgling on his own blood. His eyes were wild and disbelieving as he pointed accusingly at the officers in front of him. He tried to say something, but his eyelids fluttered and he collapsed to the ground, blood-soaked and dying. There was a tense pause. Both shinobi and civilians stared at each other uncomprehendingly. The spark flew, the kindle burned and the fires were lit. With a furious roar, the crowd surged forward, pushing back the military police even as they slammed their batons into the protesters. The officers disappeared underneath the overwhelming might pressed against them. Even the shinobi couldn't hold back the tide, and although many of the rioters went down under a barrage of shuriken, dozens more took their place. Naruto ignored the rioters, keeping his gaze peeled on the rooftop. Contact. Rooftop, bearing west. Activate bloodlines. From behind their masks, the two bloodline-using males activated their eyes. There was a split-second pause as Daichi and Sasuke analyzed the information gathered by the Byakugan and Sharingan. Daichi abruptly tensed and his hands flew in a flurry of sign code. 3 contacts moving away on escape vector. Naruto gritted his teeth. Kage, Daichi, follow me. Sasuke, Yuka, assist local friendly forces, lethal force authorized only if necessary, scatter. In a flurry of movement, the Anbu team dispersed. Naruto took to the rooftops in a blur of movement, his blonde locks thrown back by the force of his movement and the wintry breeze. Kage and Daichi took guard behind him, and they began to chase after the enemy contacts. Naruto's thoughts were whirling, his fists clenched and his eyes hard behind his mask, and he bounded across the rooftops faster than the average man could see. The riot here had obviously not been an accident. No, the chaos happening behind him was the result of an enemy operation. Somebody had gone to a lot of effort to set this up, and for the gains for the enemy was apparent. A riot like this would have significant repercussions for the land of fire and Konoha. A planned operation like this was the type of black ops that only a specialized type of shinobi could perform. It was without a doubt their opponents were foreign Anbu. Contact west 2.6 clicks, Daichi signed furiously. Naruto jerked his head and the trio of Anbu changed direction. In the 30 seconds or so that they had been sprinting after the enemy, they had left the inner city behind and had moved towards the outskirts. The buildings here were nowhere near as nice, they were more like huts than homes, and they seemed to be held together just as much mud and bark as bricks. Beyond the poorer districts lay the forest. The canopy shielded the ground form light, and the constant snow significantly reduced visibility. It was a good tactic, but while the weather would normally be a good shield against pursuit, in this case it wasn't going to make a difference. The Byakugan was not fooled by things like snow and branches. The trio bounded across the rooftop, barely pausing as they crouched down before they jumped again. Then, as they were coming down to land on the roof of the next house, Kage abruptly twisted in the air. Trap, he called. The older shinobi lashed out with his foot and Daichi grabbed it, using the momentum to alter his trajectory and land somewhere else. At the same time, Naruto brought his hands together and concentrated. Wind release, great wind breakthrough. It was a sloppy, less refined and far less powerful version of the technique, and the air that burst from his hands was more of a splutter than a gust. It was enough to push Kage down, away from the trap. At the same time, the recoil from the technique pushed Naruto back, and he twisted through the air to land expertly on a nearby roof. The maneuver had taken less than 2 seconds, and the Anbu team recovered in an instant and continued to purse the unknown enemy. They had exited the city now and were approaching the forest, however, the air flashed with a sudden warmth and great gouts of fire sprouted from the tree line. Naruto was forced to come to a stop, his blood racing and his heart pumping as a series of explosions rocked through the forest. The sound was deafening and huge volumes of black, oily smoke rose up into the air. For a moment, it seemed like the entire forest was on fire, but then the chakra-fueling explosions began to dissipate and the fires began to die down. Nonetheless, they had wasted 20 seconds waiting for the fires to recede to a safe level, and Naruto felt a sinking sensation in the bottom of his stomach as he realized that the enemy had gotten away. There was no way that the Anbu squad could continue a pursuit into an area obviously laden with traps. Either the traps would delay Sigma Team long enough for the enemy to escape, or the unknown enemy would ambush them, and Naruto had no way of knowing just how many of them were hidden within the forest. Next to him, Kage considered the flame and then turned to his captain. Continue. Naruto reluctantly shook his head. Cancel pursuit. Fall back to assist local forces. Daichi made an annoyed TSK under his breath, but he turned with Kage, and together they disappeared in a flicker of movement. Uchiha Sasuke was panting, but he didn't let that slow him down as he spun around and delivered a strong kick to the man creeping up from him. With a roar of pain, the man was propelled backwards and landed painfully on the ground. Sasuke didn't even feel a smidgen of satisfaction at the sight, and he gripped his kunai tightly. Blood dripped from the edge of it, and around him 3 men twitched as the last vestiges of life left them, their makeshift weapons of wood and metal broken and useless. Dozens of others groaned as they fell back, unable to break through the trainee ANBU's defense. With the arrival of Sasuke and Yuka, the military police were able to establish a foothold at the very center of the gates to the spire. Sasuke and Yuka were not genin, and they were more than a match for even a group of angry rioters. Yet, the rioters hadn't cared about their injuries and casualties, and 3 times Sasuke had been forced to use his kunai against those who continued on despite their wounds. Even then, they continued to come unabated. Sharingan spinning, Sasuke turned to face the crowd as it continued to surge forward. They yelled and spat hatred at the shinobi, seemingly uncaring about their own losses, spittle flying from their mouths. The genin that had been supporting them had either retreated or fallen. Only one remained, and he was on his last legs, crimson staining his bandages as he knelt down, unable to move. Still, he wielded his kunai well, and several rioters staggered away bleeding, while dozens of others surrounded him, unwilling to move into the genin's range. Sasuke's Sharingan spun, and he used his superior perception and agility allowed him to dart through the mob. His eyes gleaming red, it took less than 3 seconds to take down several of the unaware civilians. As they fell to the ground, however, a dozen more from the crowd took their place, their face twisted with rage and anger. He had no choice. Sasuke flipped through some hand seals, molding the chakra within him, and his chest swelled as he took in a deep breath. Fire release. Great fire. Suddenly, a tremendous wave of pressure washed over the crowd and, for a second, their momentum halted. Pure, undiluted chakra presence, thick and heavy, crushed down on them all, stamping down on the unceasing rage and fury of the mob. Sasuke saw Naruto appear at the center of the crowd, his hands brought together in a hand seal. I am Anbu, Naruto thundered. You will stand down or you will be destroyed. Sasuke winced at the voice as it boomed in his ears. The sheer presence that the boy was generating was nothing like he had ever felt before. Normally, the blonde was a rather cheerful person. Even in training, when Naruto was beating him down, he had usually done so with a smile, mocking or not. The presence that pressed on him now, however, felt like the hand of an angry god threatening to smite him if he dared disobey. It would be better to die than to go against a power such as this. Nothing was worth it, nothing. Sasuke shook his head at that, feeling somewhat woozy. Then, his Sharingan spun and he broke the illusion that had settled down on him. His head clearing, his could make out Yuka behind Naruto, weaving an area of effect genjutsu, her hands perpetually moving through the hand seals. She was obviously attempting to stoke the fear of the crowd and it worked. A combination of the genjutsu and the sheer presence that Naruto was bringing to bear on the mob of rioters was enough to override the hatred, and the majority of the crowd shifted back, fear plainly visible on their faces. A few were tough or stupid enough to break free of the illusion, but as they darted forward they met Kage, who dispatched them with ruthless efficiency. His black blade was streaked with blood by the time he was done, and when he took a step towards the crowd they took a step backwards. Stay where you are. The voice of Naruto roared, and it was impressive enough even without the genjutsu backing it up. If you move, you'll die. Sasuke could only breathe a sigh of relief. He took in deep breaths, trying to control his breathing, and it was with a sudden start that he realized that his hand was shaking. He looked down at it, and then at the kunai he was clasping. A drip of blood fell off of the edge of the blade, and he stared at it. In the gleam of the droplet, he saw his Sharingan staring back. The effect was ruined as a gust of warm wind blew through them. The giant effigy of the Hokage continued to burn, radiating warmth throughout street, and discarded rubbish and papers were brought up off of the ground. One such paper came close to him, and the quick glimpse that he got of it was enough to make him snatch it out of the air. What he read made his eyebrows rise. As the crowd settled down and more shinobi began to approach, Sasuke quickly approached Naruto. The presence still radiated out from him, but it was slowly receding as the crowd became more manageable. It was hard to tell what the blonde was feeling, his face hidden by his mask, but when Sasuke handed the piece of paper to his captain he knew that the other boy wasn't happy. Sarutobi, the King Slayer. Murderer of the 14th Fire Lord. Sasuke heard Naruto sigh. This is not going to go down well, the captain muttered. Looking at the bodies of the bloodied and dead that littered the ground in front of the gates, Sasuke could only agree with him. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.